Hey, help me spread these hashtags as much as possible. Hashtag BreatheFree113 and hashtag DoorstepRiot. Our main goal is to start nightly doorstep protests until the November 3rd election in case marching becomes unsustainable because of COVID. Dear friends and allies, my name is Juan Ramon Quesada. I'm a kindergarten teacher in Denver. As a person of color, a Salvadorian immigrant, and an advocate for underprivileged children, I feel a strong responsibility to say and do something right now. So here's a humble contribution for now. The Breathe Free 11-3 campaign for sustained protest and action. The murder of George Floyd is both tragedy and turning point. It is defining us as we speak. We cannot be passive in that process. We must define the moment. President Obama and others have already pointed to the urgency of pushing for law enforcement reforms at the local and state levels. This is indeed the necessary focus of this moment, but we cannot let the federal level off the hook. I agree with those who see this latest horror of police brutality punctuating the months-long COVID crisis in public health and the economy that has also disproportionately impacted African Americans as a clear sign that we need to demand broad and deep social justice reform at every level of government, local to federal, in every branch of government, judicial, legislative, and executive, and towards every kind of social justice, law enforcement, criminal law, education, healthcare access, public health, including clean air and water, housing, employment opportunity, etc. First, let me humbly suggest 3 goals that might help us to obtain such broad reform. The first one focuses on sustainable protest, the other 2 on political action. After that, if you still have a moment, I add some thoughts about the why for those 3 goals. Goal 1, devise potent COVID-safe protest that can be sustained daily until the election. Goal 2, contribute to other efforts in committing Biden and the Democrat establishment to a broad social justice agenda before the election. We know we'll get nothing from the Trump administration, and even if we get anything at all and he's reelected, they will quickly and shamelessly roll it back. Goal 3, contribute to other efforts in getting out the vote, especially among disillusioned minority voters. Here are the 3 goals again. In the next video, where I talk about Goal 2, I discuss the issue of disillusioned voters a little more, encouraging voters of color who haven't turned up in recent elections because, not without reason, they see the system as so rigged against them that their vote has no value. The system is rigged, but our votes still matter. Here are some details on Goal 1. We need COVID-safe protest, sustained daily until the election, and focused on Biden and the Dems. We have an immediate practical problem, though, that is also a moral dilemma. The intersection of George Floyd's murder and the double crisis of the pandemic not only presents a moment to be seized, it also puts us in a quandary that we must not ignore if we are to remain true to our social justice cause. How do we protest visibly and long-term without contributing to a health crisis that most heavily impacts those in whose name we protest, in both health and finance? Now, as I express concerns about COVID safety, I'm absolutely not making a case for delegitimizing anyone's need, desire, and right to march, especially if you're a person of color. Some of us will still feel compelled to protest shoulder to shoulder. We must all weigh these moral obligations according to our own experience and strategic calculation, and those calculations might shift with circumstances. But I hope that this campaign can at least offer, in the short term, an immediate and powerful alternative, or at least a supplement to marching, and in the long term, a sustainable protest strategy. Nevertheless, I must say this. I would hate to regret the fervor of our protesting now, when later faced with the calamity of a second COVID wave that we may have not only exacerbated, but also shunted directly into our most besieged communities, our African American communities beleaguered by COVID's health and financial devastation. As circumstances change, we might no longer want to claim that we are willing to put our individual lives at risk to protest for social change. We know how this works by now. We've all heard Fauci say it over and over. It is not just our lives that we are risking when we promote contagion. And when we march, we cannot count on masks to prevent the spread of COVID-19 because the scientists have told us that social distancing is even more crucial than masks. See the Lancet article for more on that. Tear gas and other stressors during protests often make people remove their masks, even as they're coughing and screaming in pain. And we have all seen that it is impossible to enter the crush of a protest and demand of all your neighbors that they stay 6 feet away from you, because many of them will simply answer that they are being squeezed from elsewhere. So what do? It is my hope that the Breathe Free 11-3 slogan can impel at least one immediate solution to the most time-sensitive of the three goals. The plan is simple: a call and response doorstep protest. Taking our cue from the nightly howling at 8 p.m. for first responders, we share the Breathe Free 11-3 slogan and other slogans across neighborhood streets from our own doorsteps at, say, 11:03 a.m. and or at 20:20, that is to say 8:20 p.m. In call and response style, the north or west side of your street starts the slogan and the south or east side completes it. As we get more participation, perhaps we'll be able to recruit a website designer. This could be followed by a software designer for a very simple app that can help us to, number one, change the slogans daily or weekly. Number two, sync each side of the street in powerful unison, sort of like the highlighted lyrics in karaoke. And three, alternate the call and response from one side of the street to the other with precision. We would sustain this every night until the election, prodding each other and capturing media attention through COVID-safe protesting. The slogans would be aimed at the second and third goals: making Joe commit and getting out the vote, especially from disillusioned voters. Now, besides being COVID-safe, there are two further benefits to these doorstep protests. One, congregational protests are difficult to sustain long-term. Doorstep protests, on the other hand, will be far easier to sustain because they don't take people away from work, don't require transportation and a large time commitment, and don't require permits. Although I do agree with the person who said that if you get a permit, it's not a protest, it's a parade. Number two, doorstep protests will deny fuel to the looting that has unfairly smeared this movement in the eyes of some, even when what they saw was not mere opportunistic looting, but rioting as a legitimately disruptive expression of rage. Indeed, we must ensure that doorstep protests remain somehow disruptive enough. Here are some of the slogans we can start with. Now, I want to add that I know that some folks might feel a little wary of such a tactic if they live in politically mixed neighborhoods, where it might feel too confrontational and in your face. We definitely don't want to create conditions for irreparable enmity or even violence right in our own neighborhoods. And that's okay. We must remember that the Breathe Free 11-3 protests are not aimed at the Trump establishment. And as far as his voting bloc goes, some of his supporters will now be morally outraged enough to abandon him. But these doorstep protests will be aimed squarely at Biden, at the overly moderate Democratic establishment, and at each other. We're holding Joe's feet to the fire, but also each other's, to get out and vote. We know we have the numbers. Accordingly, if this type of protest only takes root in largely Democrat-leaning majority white neighborhoods and in minority neighborhoods, it will achieve its goal. Those two targets, the Biden establishment and each other, are the focus of the other two goals. I hope that you can help me plug these two goals in whatever action circles you're already engaged with. Protest organizing groups, groups with friends and neighbors, political strategizing groups, even the dinner table. If you know anyone who could help with a website and the simple app that I described, please let me know at chosenjuan9000@gmail.com. Please send this to everyone who might be interested at some point. If you'd like to know more about Goal 2, please watch the next video, Breathe Free 11-3, Goal 2.